Hello, Briat. Can you hear me?
Very well.
Good, I'm good. It's good afternoon. It's afternoon here as well.
Good.
So today, I thought that a good topic would be there is sexuality is a very confusing endeavor for a lot of people. And we can be a little bit crazy about it. There's a really great desire for a lot of people, and just being able to look at it from a spiritual view. I think as sexuality and spirituality, most in spiritual terms or groups would be the Tantra community are the ones that probably are most associated with that. That's not my way necessarily. And but I do have a belief around and an experience around sexual spirituality, and sexuality is a spiritual path and journey. And I think you and I both have very different ideas about sexuality and how it lives for us, and what our experience of that is. But I think we can agree on one thing. Let's just start there on maybe something we agree on, is that I think sexuality is sacred. It's a sacred experience for me. So does that fit for you?
Yeah, I think I would rather say that it can be, but it's not necessarily.
I agree. For me, but that is definitely there's really no point to sexuality unless it is sacred.
Yeah.
And how I hold sacred might be probably different than yours is. But yes, I agree that there's lots of sexuality that isn't sacred. So, and I think it depends on who the individual is and how aligned with who it is and what gets released from them. If it's healthy for them, if it's aligning with who they are, if they're learning about themselves and having and experiencing freedom in some kind of way, and certainly pleasure, then I think the definition of sacred can be quite wide.
Yeah.
So just to start us off, what is your overall philosophy around sexuality and I don't want to use the word sacred, so I don't want to put words in your mouth. So how would you describe your spiritual understanding of sexuality?
Well, sex is it's the main driving force in the material universe. Between every species of life on every single planet, this is the driving force. One can observe any species and see that sex is very much an integral part of it. Not just integral part, but an important feature as well. So it's according to the Vedic perspective, which is what I'm presenting, is that in one sense, sex it's the cause for bondage in the material universe, and that it increases bodily attachment, and that by engaging in sex in an unrestricted way, then it actually increases the idea that I am this body, and that because one of the main driving factors of it is pleasure. It's like it's all about pleasure, and in the material world, it's normally about you. And if you're a little bit in advance, it's also a little bit about that other person as well. But I don't think anybody who's honest would be able to admit that actually when I'm having sex, it's 100% about the other person, and it's not at all about me. So I'd be very surprised to find somebody that actually.
That's pretty hard to do in a union.
Yeah.
As far as I can see.
So I'm giving her like walking around the mountain here. It's a big mountain, and giving like different perspectives,
Yeah, keep going. Yeah. Climb, baby, climb.
So that's on the one sense. It's a driving force. It's what makes the world go round. It also acts as an impetus for creating and expanding. When one is celibate, then one's desires are very minimal. The moment one engages in sex life, then so many desires multiply from that. In fact, the word for woman in Sanskrit is called stri. And stri means that which expands. So it's the moment a man and a woman connect with each other through the medium of the woman, who is considered to be like a storehouse of energy. Like if you look at Sankhya, the man is like the directing power, and the woman is the energy that gives it power. The man gives direction, and the woman like impregnates it. She makes it bigger. So, and there's no well-known saying that behind every successful man or powerful man is a powerful and successful woman, because she's like that energetic Shakti that really gives it, and he takes that Shakti and drives it into something, and so they work together like that. So in this way, when through the medium of the woman, the man expands and realizes his desires, and at the same time, the woman also gets to realize her desires, which are quite different from the man's desires. They're looking at the same things, but they're wanting to get some different things out of that same thing, which is why there's often conflict in relationships, because they've got different ideas of how they want to enjoy a particular thing. Okay, so not to get too much into that. So, and in the spiritual sense, that ultimately, if one has a desire for sex, then one will have to keep taking birth again and again and again, so that you can come and have that again and again and again. So in this way, sex desire is very strong, and it perpetuates that. But at the same time, sex can also be utilized in a way that can also free you from that bondage. So that requires some regulation. That means there has to be some regulation. And in the Vedic culture, the Brahminical regulation, or the regulation of those who are studying and meditating on Brahman or spirit, is that they only have sex for begetting children. And the purpose of begetting children is so that you can bring a soul into this life, into a human form, a body that you're giving them, and you can train them to utilize this human life properly, so that they can ascend with this one life that they have, that they don't have to come back again. So in that way, one's desire for sex can be realized, and also it can be utilized for a purpose much more than just engaging two bodies together. And also this idea also... Excuse me?
Other than procreation.
Yeah, exactly. So even though one might want to just have the pleasure, that's fine, but at least one should use it for a higher purpose than just the pleasure. And what I found in many like New Age spirit circles, and like kind of quasi-spiritual circles, is that is that oftentimes sex is just being covered up. This pleasure is being covered up and presented as something spiritual, which in fact is actually just about pleasure, but they're just telling themselves that it is about it's about spirituality. Obviously, that's not everybody, but I think many people do that because they're not following any kind of teachings. They're not following any kind of path. They're pretty much just doing what feels good. So so it's not a very sure kind of practice in that sense. With regards to tantric sex, where sex is used in tantra in a spiritual path, I've read up some literatures which speak about that. So when we're looking at tantra, we actually have to go to tantric texts and see what they are saying, and then they prescribe a particular process which one then has to follow. One can't just do something and then imagine like a process and then call it tantra, which a lot of Western people like to do. They kind of appropriate it like that, and in the course they actually harm themselves. So this tantric process is actually in the beginning requires absolute celibacy. It requires you to be completely vegetarian and very, very strict in your lifestyle and activities, and you have to do that for many, many years. And there's some yoga involved in there also. And then after many years, at some point, I'm just skipping, like there's many stages, but at some point where the interesting information comes in, you have to, because the idea is you want to become detached from attachment and aversion, which are just two sides of the same coin, attachment and aversion. So now you've become detached from not eating anything, non-vegetarian things. You become detached from sex and this stuff, but now you also want to not be averse to that. So what they do with meat, you actually cook meat. I think they cook it or they have it raw. But the thing is, you've been vegetarian for many years now, and now you're gorging on a lot of meat, and you have to eat that without vomiting. You have to eat it without having any kind of negative thoughts about the activity in your mind. and be completely, in the balance, where you're not averse to eating it and you're not attached to eating it either. Because at that point, you're not going to be attached to it. You might be more averse to it than attached. So I thought that's quite interesting, which at that point will be quite a gross experience, if you have not been eating meat for many years. And then after some time, then you also, you also have to have a guru, by the way. There's a guru also instructing you on these processes, so you don't just do this solo. And then you have to find a yogini, means a female yogi who's also following these tantric processes, and you have to have sex with her. And by controlling your own energetic body, you actually have to, instead of you losing your semen in the process, you're supposed to extract the energy from her body and draw it in you, and then push that upwards. And then in this way, you're not also getting into that kind of, which is also very, very difficult to do. It's very difficult to do. And then after that, there's some other things which it gets really gross, where you start doing really disgusting things relating to like dead bodies and skeletons and some other things, which basically is you are putting yourself in a very dark and dense space, but for the purpose of not becoming averse or attracted to them. You're just supposed to walk through, I don't know if it's an appropriate thing to say, but walk through the shadow of the valley of death and have no fear and of evil, and you're just going through there. But this is very dangerous, because at any point, if you slip and you fall into those things, then you're actually in a very, very degraded condition. You're in an extremely degraded condition. And, to get out of there can be very difficult. So it's a very dangerous and treacherous path, but it is a path which has been prescribed in the authentic Tantra scriptures of the Vedas. And so that's the only mention that I found, like in Tantra and in the Vedic literature, where they actually talk about sex as being a spiritual path. And then they don't even focus on sex so much even. Because it's actually, most of the time, there's no sex, and then there's a little bit, and then afterwards there's no sex again. And the only other mention of sex is in the Bhakti tradition, where sex can be utilized for a higher purpose. And the principle is, it's like, what is the reason behind what you're doing? If it is to serve God, then that means it's devotion, and that activity immediately becomes spiritual. And and also, if you have children, it purifies your desire for sex too. It purifies your desire. And also, contraception it's a very degrading thing. Actually, contraceptions are very low vibration, because you're interfering with natural processes. And if you want to engage in something, then why do you want to alter the natural kind of, to use latex or to use pregnancy control? It's interfering with the whole thing on so many different ways. I think it's very easy to understand. You take medication, it affects your mind, it affects your body. It's a foreign thing. You're using latex, it changes the feeling and that energy of oil. Latex comes from oil, is also not very good. So in that way, birth control is not good at all. So it's like, if you want to do it, then you should also be willing to take the consequence of that also, which means you could potentially get a child, which is also part of the whole package of sex, which helps it also become more spiritual. Because then it also becomes, then you sure know if it really was about you or not. Because when the child comes and you're not really into it, then you'll get to see if your motivation, where your motivation was at. And a child will really quickly purify you from those desires. So in that way, there's nothing wrong with sex. But in the Western world, sex definitely has been way too much glorified. In the media and in music and in movies, sex is too much glorified. It's
Agreed.
The pleasure you get from sex, for one, has been so puffed up. It's like the pleasure you see in pornography and in movies and things is fake. It's fake. It doesn't exist. But now everybody's pursuing this, and that's why they're so unsatisfied with their partners, because they're trying to get something that doesn't exist. And on the other hand, also, it's given so much importance that it's really important for you to have good sex. Otherwise, you're considered like less of a human being. So that's how it is on this planet. On other planets, there are other destinations where you can go, where the quality of sex is much better, and you can also have a lot more of it without having any negative effects. For example, The
Mm.
other reasons of this Earth planet, which exists in dimensions inaccessible to us now, which I've read, it's in the Bhagavatam and other Puranas, they describe um, that there are places where people live much longer, they live up to 1,000 years. And there they can enjoy sex life pretty much unlimitedly, and the pleasure is so much more than it is here. And you don't get pregnant from having sex. And when there's 1 year left of your life, then the woman will get pregnant and have a very short pregnancy and a very quick and painless birth. And then they will leave their bodies and they can continue to the next destination. So places like that exist if you want to enjoy sex life. But on this planet, enjoyment is not the purpose. The purpose is to work. The purpose is to prepare yourself to go to some other destination after this life, and go to a destination where you're meant to enjoy. But this planet is not meant for enjoyment. So yeah, I think that's quite a mouthful. Um, it's also quite unpopular position in many ways, but it's a very good perspective which I'm just presenting.
Let's just say it's not my position.
I know.
So this is going to be fun. Um, are you willing to speak about how this expresses itself in your life, like your history and the rest of it is? Is it? Well, I'll ask some questions because I'll be asking some questions trying to find a fine line of how I live my life and what my intentions are and what my purpose is and how it's a spiritual path for me. And so I'm going to take some of the concepts which are fairly on the extremes of the continuum,
Yeah.
and see if I can find a happy medium. So so that you kind of started off saying that sexuality is the sexual desire is quite a driving force in this material world, maybe the driving force.
Yeah.
And that I no pun intended, but I think you used the word bondage into this material world, which I found funny. and so that sexuality can actually create somebody having the experience more of that I am this body.
Yeah.
And for me, for example, is that sexuality for me, I'm not this body and I'm not this mind. And sexuality for me really is the peak of union, of where I align with myself and I align with all that is, that I unite with the universe in great and beautiful pleasure. And so what it does for me is that it's probably my largest piece of evidence that I'm not this body. The part about it's just about me is it's just about me in a lot of this, how people experience sex. And for me, that it's about, what I found is the more that I am concerned about the others, the woman's pleasure, and that I put my entire focus is only on pleasuring her and being able to get better at being able to do that. That's my only intention. And that it's not about me. I get pleasure. The interesting thing is the more that I take my focus off me and pleasure her, the more that I get pleasure from watching her pleasure. I enjoy women and I enjoy pleasuring women, and I think women enjoy being enjoyed. So there's a really beautiful exchange that's there that actually just reminds me of everything that is sacred about the world. The exchange is absolutely amazing, and gives me, it's probably my largest piece of evidence that I am experientially, that I'm connected to all that is. It expands out into all that is. It's really quite amazing. The sex drive is like, if you do get caught up into sex and that it's about me and it's about my body and that I have an attachment to it, which I want to take a look at that when I get there, is that it can cause you to keep coming back because you do keep desiring that sex and you keep reincarnating for that reason. Yes, and I do think there is a lot of quasi-spiritual ideas and groups, most of the people that I've seen that are having a spiritual sexual path is really about freedom. It's just that they want to experience like whatever places they feel vulnerable and they're not able to let go. There's a lot of fear in it. For a lot of them is being able to feel safe. Like, I really need you to get my no. And that so I get to be the gatekeeper at each level of this intimacy, and that there's something that can align with them. Otherwise, it's a little bit too much to the degree on the other end of the continuum brutal. So I understand that to a degree. It's not my path, but it's I understand people, like, because it is one of the greatest driving forces in this material world, and that we are so indoctrinated with just everything. You mentioned all kinds of things, from pornography to being needing to be a great lover, and there's so little idea of in men. It's a really good representation of how little men and women know about each other, and how much they're actually taking care of each other, and really having each other blossom into really the opportunity of man and woman. We're made to be together. We're made to fit, and that we're not really working that. There's a lot of vicious cycles. There's not a lot of feeding cycles where we're taking something away and we're upset, especially if you're in a relationship for a long period of time. And I think sexuality is just a representation of wherever you are with that. I love the fact that you talked about that the Sanskrit word woman is expands, and I like that a man's energy is designed to drive, and a woman's energy is to expand and provide. Two things is that if they don't trust each other, and if they're not understanding what each other's job is, which there is a lot of confusion about that today, maybe at its lowest ebb. But I really do like that the Sanskrit word for women means expand, and also this being the Kali Yuga. Kali being the angered feminine, that is, her necklace of male heads around her neck really points to, I think, that how much that women are there's a lot of upset between men and women these days, and women are angry at the patriarch and at men. And in Kali Yuga, I think that's completely appropriate for the time that we're in, and that that we've moved into more of a feminine time since 2012, that it's feminine energy now that is leading.
There's a saying in the Vedas. It says that if in the house, if the wife is pleased and satisfied, then there the goddess of fortune will reside.
Yes.
And if the woman is not satisfied and protected, then there will be failure, there will be disruption and destruction. And
pain and suffering.
Society, you just look at the society and you see how happy the women are, and it'll immediately give you an idea of the culture of that place and also where they're heading. Because very much women will amplify whatever you give them. And if
absolutely.
And if you give them trouble, they're going to amplify that too. Not like as a concerted conspiracy, but just as a natural consequence of how.
Yes. It's very natural. There's nothing that they're doing. The job is what they're doing. But having a word that there's still a spiritual false ego cleansing that is needed for men and women. Just if the woman's unpleased, but doesn't mean everything that women want is what they should have or what they should get, or it's going to be giving them satisfaction. So you're absolutely right. If she's unpleased, there will be suffering. But being able to, that are desired are going to, if they were fulfilled, that would be good for anybody.
Yeah,
so there is.
That's why you should. That's why you have principles and values, that you can pursue those things in as far as you can stay within your principles and values and the culture that you want, and then
bit, and then, so can you see that when I say this, and it can be about just figuring out, every woman is different, and that my every desire is actually to give, melt into and keep giving up. It's being able to watch on her face as she is lets go into a deeper level of vulnerability, which she wouldn't have done on her own, except what was the lock in the key in the lock was the pleasure and the taking care of and the interest in just pleasuring her. And these walls of vulnerability just keep dropping into a greater and greater union. Do you see that as being possible without, the things that I'm talking about from your perspective? Can you see these things possible and having a spiritual sexuality? And that, or is that, do you see that as, and I'm taking it back to attachment, is that I do desire, I do desire it, and that, but it's not from a place of panic or that my life is going to be better with it. Like there's, it's an expression of a great alignment with myself. I can do that in meditation and all the rest of it. My sexual experience is even significantly deeper than that, which is really quite amazing that it can do that. It really aligns me with me and that all that is. So, and then aversions that really I don't really have. There's things that I enjoy, like I don't need to go do a whole bunch of crazy things so that I know I'm not averse to it. I'm just not interested. I'm not really that, some of the thoughts I'm kind of averse to. I can't even say some of the words you used earlier. That's how, but I have no interest in any of that. And just really the purity of what is masculine, what is feminine, that we are godly, and there's a God. That's when I speak about the goddess and seeing the goddess in the feminine, and that there is a goddess in there, and being able to reflect that back to her is really quite an amazing place. So any thoughts about any thoughts that you have in, contrary or in line with the things that I've intimated?
Okay, I appreciate your perspectives, and I can understand where it's coming from and the sincerity of it. It's nice to hear. On one hand, it's like when we're talking about giving pleasure and these things, it's the interaction of the bodies, and also on a subtle level, it's the interaction of the minds, the astral bodies. If it's a little bit more conscious, the sex. So this is happening. But still, the astral body and the physical body, they're not us. It's got nothing to do with us. So that pleasure is being stimulated by the body. It's like, it's like a machine. You press a button and there's a certain result. And then the quality of it is assessed by the subtle body. And then there's also energies exchanged there, like your chakras are opening up and there's some exchange things happening. So in that sense, it can definitely give you a feeling of being very close to another person. Because as you said that, you go into deeper levels of vulnerabilities, you're dropping down more levels of your guard. And it's, in a sense, you're completely interfacing with another person's astral body. So that is, and having a complete code exchange, you could say, between that.
Well, this is how it transcends that for me. Is in meditation, there is just where I disconnect from my intellect and go into my subtle body, and that from there I'm able to commune with creation, and that there's a oneness that actually gets created in that. And that I'm no longer a body, I'm certainly not a personality, and that I see there's seamless between whatever it is that I am and oneness. And there's a real appreciation as soon as I start realizing that I am the same energy as creation, is that it's really, how deep does that go? The love for self, it just becomes an overwhelming, intimate relationship with self, about how much that I'm lovable and how great that I am because creation
Yeah.
made me that way.
So, but
And that even
thing about
all of that being true,
is that it's very,
uh-huh.
the thing about this, because you're in a very internal space, and the space is completely subjective, and to have any kind of objectivity there is near impossible, because all you have to go on.
Say that again. What are you referring to? Meditation or sexuality?
The sexuality, because that space you go into is a very internal space, and it's completely subjective. So to what you have
Well, let me finish. Let
outside
me
of
finish the
yourself and
thought. Let me finish
experience
the
to
thought.
actually refer to.
Is that so? The thought finishing how it's related to meditation for me is that that union takes me past bodies, takes me past that. There's no longer two bodies, and it isn't one body either. It's in everything. It's all that is. It goes well beyond bodies and sexuality, and it isn't any different than meditation for me. Is that connection that I have where I can feel creation actually occurs for me sexually,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the same. It's the same experience.
But why do you
And
need why do you need to rub your body against another person's in order to get to there? If you are not this body and you're not this mind, then why do you?
Oh, I didn't say that I had to do that. I can do that in meditation as well.
Yeah.
I like to do that, and that the other thing is it's not just creation made us wisely, and that there are a lot of admittedly the most dangerous territory probably on this planet is between men and women, and this entire field that I'm talking about. And that it's not so much that why do I have to do that? Creation made me that way, and I don't think creation did it just to procreate. I think it's a window to God that is really no different. For me, it's a window for God. I assimilate them as the same, and that I'm able to. Yes, there's a lot of other elements in it, and yes, people can get confused there. But for me, it's actually a beautiful coming to oneness,
Yeah.
and the God self in me and the goddess in her, and we go, and that's the doorway. And what we get released into is all
Yes,
that is.
I
And
agree
being
with you
able
on
to,
that. I agree with you on that, that it can be a window to God. But my question that I pose is, how does one use it as a window to God? Because it can also be many other things. And to do that properly, one has to follow some kind of authentic, bona fide process. One can't imagine up one's own process and principles and then engage in that. One has to follow in some kind of ancient way of doing it that actually will guarantee that you are actually using it as a window to God. That's the only thing that I'm saying. Because
yeah,
we don't have the refinement of intelligence and the realization and purity of consciousness and heart to be able to, or maybe I just speak for myself at least, to be able to distinguish, on such a fine level on the soul, that whether what we're doing is actually what we think we're doing. So
I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good. and in several millennia, I will be ancient. So, but I understand what you're saying, and yes, it's fraught with danger, and I'm satisfied with that. I'm on a right track, and that it does come with all the spiritual practices and principles that I apply. But I haven't found anybody that I've talked to around sexual practice isn't my practice. Not one of them. So there's things that I've actually had to go my own way, and I think I've done a pretty good job. And it's good spiritual journey. It's good spiritual journey if you can get it. So what were you saying? Sorry.
Sorry, I was saying we had 34 minutes, and my data might run out in 5 minutes or so.
Yeah, I think we're done.
Yeah.
I enjoyed this conversation. We found out the place. I knew we disagreed at some point, and now I know exactly the places we disagreed. And then I'll get back to you. Maybe I'll go find a ancient sexual discipline that suits me, but celibacy is not it. And thank you very much.
Okay, thank you also. I thoroughly enjoyed that, and I hope the listeners also appreciated the different perspectives.
Yeah, I hope they enjoyed it as well.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Riyad.
Thanks so much,
Love and light, my friend. Bye-bye.